Gandalf came to us as the wandering grey wizard, the one who loved and appreciated all life in Middle-earth, and he left us as the powerful Gandalf the White, with still the same love and care, but with far more power. Hello and welcome to the Broken Sword. Today,
build me an army worthy of Mordor.
as you may recall from some of our previous videos, like the full story of Saruman, Gandalf's arrival in Middle-earth came as one of the 5 Istari, or wizards, who came into the lands and mingled among the peoples, each in the guise of an elderly bearded gentleman with a natural skill for magic and perhaps pipeweed too. Despite the brief glimpses that we get into his life, that being the character whose actions and words we are able to read and understand, as though he was speaking directly to us, like the sun. Though it was not made specifically for one of us or the other, it is there to shine for us all to see. And Gandalf, as you will see, is often linked to the sun by metaphor or spirit. We will consider each. Gandalf was unable to exert the true extent of his force as Gandalf the Grey, which is why the spirit or Fëa is caged in such a frail and unassuming frame. When sent to Middle-earth as part of an order who